Dobson chapter 4 starts introducing the basic verb forms in Greek, and it deals with singular verbs. First of all, I just want to recap the main points to take from the previous chapter. Fundamentally, this is about noun endings. Logos is your noun. The ending of logos will be shared in idea and often in form with articles, pronouns, adjectives, and many participles. And Dobson has started introducing these. So, you had houtos, where the os is shared with logos, and houtos is a pronoun meaning this. And then you had the article, ho, where there's a relationship, but it's not exactly the same. So if we fill in the endings on logos, you'll see the pattern. I'm going to put the case markers in. We'll look at those more as we continue to work through the book. Nominative, accusative, genitive. They will get explained further as we go on. Logos, logon, logou, logoi, logus, logon. And that's singular and plural. And the article, ho, ton, tu, hoi, tous, ton. On the whole, you've got a correspondence between the article ending and the noun ending in these forms. This will be built up in bits and pieces until you reach chapter 12, but we will look at the whole thing sooner than that because it's useful. So recapping, you've had words for the, and you've had nouns that change their endings depending on what case and number they are. You've also had estin, he is, and en, he was. This is the majority of what you've covered so far. You've got the basic article and noun agreement and some pronouns going with it, houtos, and 2 verbs. We trailed the regular verbs, and it's now time to look at the endings of these more systematically. But first of all, how does Dobson actually deal with things? Trailing it is very characteristic of him. He starts off by grouping chapters. So chapters 1 to 3 were very much about introduction. Once you move on from that, we look at things in grammatical groupings. And the first grouping deals with basic noun and verb endings more systematically. And each chapter batch has got a short introduction summarising all the grammar for that batch. So if you want a reference point, put a little sticky note next to each of the batch summaries, and that will help you see how things come together. The chapters are then very short. This means that he's only introducing a little bit of new material each time, and quite often he'll introduce half a verb in one chapter and the other half in the next chapter, and that allows you to really practice each individual bit. It can be frustrating if you're trying to move very quickly, but it also means you can move quickly because you're never having to deal with too much material at once. Once he gives you a chapter, he then breaks it down into every individual little bit. So he breaks down each chapter into sections, trailing individual little tiny bits, one at a time. He'll give you an intro, profiling what he's going to do, and then go back over it one by one. And the exercises are very cumulative. They will start off with a very simple subject, verb, object sentence, and then become more complex until you're reading quite extended Greek. The answers to these exercises are given on the page, and that allows you to do a certain amount of self-study. You're not necessarily going to agree with the way Dobson expresses himself, though, so don't worry if you don't sound exactly like him. Check with me if you're concerned that your reading of an exercise isn't the same as his, though. We will be able to cover a lot of these in class, but we're not going to be able to do all of them. He then gives you sections of practice and manipulation at the end of chapters. These aren't there in earlier versions of the book. They're a newer thing he introduced, but they are very useful. They get you using your Greek. To think in Greek, to play with Greek, to do the intellectual brain gym you need to be successful at Greek. So these are great, and we will try to do as many of these as we can. He then gives you random extras. This has got a short line for a reason. I don't always like them. They include some fairly misogynistic rhymes, which are amusing in their own way, but not to my liking. So if you find his random extras helpful, great. They're not my favourite part. And then often he gives you progress tests as waypoints. These are usually multiple choice, and that helps you be able to see what the kinds of ideas that you might be playing around with in Greek are and how to differentiate between things that can be quite similar. So there's a lot of elements to the book, and working through each of these in turn is going to be an important part of systematically adding to your Greek knowledge. This chapter in particular starts off with a verb paradigm. He gives you the paradigm for Lego. Lego, leges, legay. Now, quite often, things are just written straight out like that in a book, and they don't explain to you what they are. I, you, he, she, it. Or in grammar speak, first, second, and third person, singular. And the verb means I speak or say. I'm almost always going to teach you using luo, though. Luo, luis, lue. Luo means I untie. Why am I going to do this? It's what the majority of grammar books do. One, it's completely regular, which Lego isn't, and therefore it's the easiest thing for you to be able to use, not to have to deal with irregularities. Two, it's short. Greek builds its verbs by adding in more and more and more little units to give you different parts of it, and they can get very long, and therefore using a verb with a short stem is really helpful. Three, it's actually a huge verb. It's a complex verb with lots of parts, and therefore you need relatively few other things to help fill in the bits of the verb that luo doesn't cover. Lego doesn't have as many parts as luo, so luo is useful. Against luo is you don't often untie things. However, apoluo is a very useful word. This is a compound and it means divorce, set free or forgive. So not only do you untie donkeys, but you forgive sins and divorce people in the New Testament. And therefore, luo is a verb that you're actually going to see a fair amount in the New Testament, which does make it a useful one to teach with. So I will always use luo as a paradigm. Dobson will vary. If you look in other textbooks, the other one you might get is pauo. I don't use pauo because it isn't quite as regular and systematic as luo. Luo remains my verb of choice. So if you can deal with lego, I say, leges, you say, legay, he says, then you'll be fine for the rest of this chapter. Do make sure you have a look at the vocab, which is updated on the spreadsheet, and we will work through exercises together.